Chapter 11 House of Randolph 3. When Gusyon moved his fingers, Mammon's magical power that had formed on the fake body of the Knoll chieftain penetrated into Catalina's body. Although the efficiency of absorbing the essence of an ordinary demon, not the Demon King, was very poor, Catalina was a little different. As a subordinate demon of the King of Greed, Yong-ho, she could use the magic power of greed through Brigada, even if she could only do it in a small way. But greed helped her absorb more magic power. It allowed her to take more magic power than usual. Moreover, what Yong-ho chose was the extraordinary evolution of magic power. Thanks to this, Catalina's magic power increased significantly at once. This was more than what Yong-ho expected. Sooner or later she will get a fourth horn, said Gusyon, glancing over Catalina. Yong-ho, who thought she was praiseworthy, unwittingly pinched her soft cheeks, then turned to Gusyon. While pointing to one of the boxes of light floating in the air, he said, "Do you mind if I choose the reward?" "Yeah, take them all." With any delay, Yong-ho took Gusyon's words into action. A red belt emerged from the box of light he selected, guided by greed. It's a belt of strength. It is a simple artifact that increases your strength when you wear it. I guess it will be good to make up for the lack of your escort girl's muscle strength. Isn't it too big for Catalina to wear? You told me that one of your subordinate demons was a craftsman. Ask him to drill a few more holes. Yong-ho wondered if it was okay to deal with it harshly, given it was an artifact, not just a belt, but he nodded. After putting it away in good order, Yong-ho carefully held Catalina, who passed out on the floor. Gusyon said again, "What do you think? Why don't you use your newly gained momentum to challenge the ninth floor?" It was a pretty attractive offer. Since he experienced Mammon's magic power, Yong-ho was also moved by Gusyon's suggestion to some extent. However, Yong-ho shook his head and replied with a bitter smile, "I'm sorry, but I have an appointment now." Yong-ho knew that the level of difficulty would increase once he moved up to a higher floor. He could get stronger if he challenged the ninth floor, but there was no guarantee that he could win unconditionally. So, he thought that it was better to maintain his best condition at the moment. Gusyon sensed it in no time. He called the man with a beast mask to guide Yong-ho. On the morning of the 5th day after he got the second reply from the House of Randolph, Yong-ho looked far away, standing in the wilderness. Behind him were Catalina, Skull, and Ophelia, with the fluttering flags of Skulls, 7 units equipped with their own weapons. Although Yong-ho arrived a little earlier than the appointment time, he didn't need to wait long. He saw a group of people approaching him from far away. They were Tigrius Randolph, head of the House of Randolph, and his men. Yong-ho and Tigrius decided on the location and time of their duel. What Yong-ho chose was a remote place in the wilderness, located between the houses of Mammon and Randolph. The place was located at a certain distance from both houses, and it was difficult for each side to prepare an ambush or trap, because all directions were open. Besides, it was also an advantage that there were no outsiders to watch the duel. Both agreed to bring only 10 people on both sides. The number of their subordinates was just right. Not too small or big. Tigrius Randolph, the head of the House of Randolph, an old man, who lightly descended from the back of a giant lizard reminiscent of a dinosaur, introduced himself. His voice was deep and sonorous. Yong-ho already recognized who he was, even his portrait through Ophelia. But he felt differently when faced with Tigrius like this. Tigrius was an old man who looked much stronger and tougher than him in the portrait. He was tall and thin. His neatly arranged hair and beard were almost gray. His gray eyes glared sharply. It was exactly what Yong-ho felt in his writing style of the reply. Tigrius was elegant. Yong-ho felt as if he met an English gentleman. A real nobleman. Behind Tigrius, in a black suit, stood his subordinate demons dressed in neat clothes as well. They were made up of several races, and even orcs were dressed in neat suits. Yong-ho also got off salami. Facing Tigrius, he introduced himself. Yong-ho Chun, the head of the House of Mammon. Tigrius narrowed his eyes at the name Yong-ho Chun. Yong-ho had never hidden his name for any reason, nor had he advertised his name. Most of the demons living in the Free City also remembered Yong-ho only as the Mammon House head, or the Demon King of Flames, but they did not know his name, Yong-ho Chun. It was a heterogeneous name even in the demon world where all kinds of races were mixed. At least it was enough to believe that he didn't come from the pure family lineage of the House of Mammon. But Tigrius didn't care about Yongho's name. He hit the ground with a large cane instead of a sword or a spear. The metal cane, which seemed to have no shortcomings as a weapon, had a woman with wings against the moon carved at the end of its corner. Rather than a simple decoration, it seemed like a strange object with magical meaning. Since we've already confirmed each other's will in the letters, we don't need to drag it long. This is the contract we talked about in advance. I have already signed it, so you sign it too. Having said that, Tigrius hit the ground with the cane, which formed a blood-red character in the air. Like the letters Tigrius sent so far, the contract contained only the essential contents. Before signing it right away, Yongho turned to Ophelia briefly. She confirmed with a look that the contract was correct. As the name suggested, the contract was an artifact for the contract. Completed by both signing the contract, this magical tool could exert a powerful deterrent. Since the magic itself was supposed to be used by the two who signed the contract, the difference in their magic power was meaningless. Just because any one of the two had a stronger magic power, he could not ignore the contents of the contract or resist its deterrence. The contract signed by the two had absolute binding power, and that was why it was extremely difficult to find such a contract in the demon world. Ironically, its absoluteness and honesty turned lots of people off. Before signing it, Yongho read the contents of the contract one more time. There was no room for any cunning play on words, because only simple and clear facts were on the contract. The loser of the duel becomes the winner's subordinate. It was not an exaggeration to say that the contract contained only that phrase. Yongho moved his fingers in the air to sign it. The letters of red light were united in the air and lighted up, and soon they were split into two and flew to Yongho and Tigrius respectively. A complex red pattern was engraved on the back of their hands. It was a sign of the contract. Tigrius said again, "We don't have to talk any longer. I hope we can have a duel right away." Rumors that Tigrius was timid were wrong. He was the most impressive of those family heads that Yongho had met until now. He was also different from Foras that gave out an animal-like murderous aura. He gave out an elegant, not murderous atmosphere. "He's a real nobleman." After murmuring a bit, Yongho nodded. He erased any lingering suspicion of Tigrius' trap or plot from his mind. It was a fair duel. It was like a fight in the arena. Yongho grabbed the red flames that bloomed in the air. He also injected magical energy into the magic magnet on his left hand, covering it with silver metal. Yongho had no intention of dealing with him lightly. Tigrius didn't come here to lose. He opened the four horns at once to project magic energy fully. The surrounding area was shaken when a new force was applied to the flow of the magical energy that filled the sky and the earth. Yongho's magic power was more than rumored. Tigrius' face was full of tension, but he was not moved yet. He also opened the horns without backing down. 3 horns protruded from Tigrius' forehead at the same time. Tigrius did not face Yongho's magic directly. He gently dissipated magic energy and stepped forward slowly. "Let's start the duel now," Tigrius said. Yongho accepted it, and at some point the two disappeared at the same time. Yongho's movement resembled that of Catalina. He did not depend solely on his physical performance like he did until now. Magic power helped his movement, resulting in an explosive, instantaneous speed. When Tigrius disappeared in front of him, Yongho looked at the left and right instinctively. When Yongho was fighting demons in the arena, he saw one fleeing at a tremendous speed, so much so that even his eyes could not catch it. But even so, it was fast in the end. It was necessary to move from the point of departure to the destination. He didn't care if it was his afterimages. Any clue that could help him find out Tigrius' course was enough, but he could see nothing. Tigrius disappeared before my eyes. Yongho's feet, who kicked the ground to rush forward, touched it again. During that short moment when he couldn't even swallow, he acted instinctively. Ophelia's screaming was heard behind his back. Blink, when he heard her voice, Yongho already turned around. His opponent disappeared in front of him. If so, where could he appear again? In front of him again, no. He would most likely appear from the side or in the rear. And there's one more thing Yongho couldn't explain. It was probably something he had learned from Aemon while sparring with him dozens or hundreds of times. Maybe the experience he had accumulated so far was the answer. But it didn't matter. Yongho instinctively turned around. By doing so, he could face Tigrius again, who disappeared in front of him by using the magic of a short-range jump. Yong-Ho's inversion was clearly faster than he expected, but Tigrius didn't feel embarrassed, for Yong-Ho had almost twice as much magic power as himself. So, no matter what Yong-Ho did, he didn't feel it was strange. From his position as a challenger, Tigrius simply did his best to do what he could. Chapter 112, House of Randalt. 4. At the same time, Tigrius prepared two magics. One originated from his cane and the other from his left hand. A barrage of magic poured out like a machine gun from the tip of the cane. It was an energy missile, one of simple yet effective attack magics. It was fast enough. Dozens of magical lumps pouring from the front were clearly intimidating. That was why Yong-Ho moved forward. He didn't distance himself from Tigrius by stepping aside or stepping back. He discerned the flow of Tigrius' magic. No, he felt it now. It was like an arrow. Energy missiles drew a certain trajectory. Yong-Ho sensed the trajectory and moved accordingly. Yong-Ho's subordinate demons felt so thrilled when they saw their master rushing forward while evading energy missiles by a hair's breadth. Grease. Tigrius urgently put into action the magic on his left hand. The ground in front of Yong-Ho lost its coefficient of friction and became extremely slippery. Yong-Ho anticipated various kinds of attack magic, but he didn't expect this kind of blocking at all. He inevitably stepped on the ground and fell, losing his balance. Seizing that chance, Tigrius once again used Blink. He really wanted to attack Yong-Ho at the moment, but increasing the distance from him was his top priority now. Tigrius' judgment was correct. Yong-Ho didn't fall helplessly. Although he didn't anticipate the kind of magic that Tigrius possessed, he sensed that something magical was forming. So, Yong-Ho swung Aemon the moment he slipped. There was no strength in his swing, but he didn't need it anyway. A wave of green flames originating from the tip of his spear swept over the place where Tigrius had stayed. Tigrius understood that the head of the House of Mammon could sense the flow of magic power. Maybe he could see it from the beginning. Anybody who was sensitive to magic could do it. It was unusual to do it during an urgent battle, but it was pointless for Tigrius to talk about it when Yong-Ho was already using it. Instead of landing behind Yong-Ho's back once again, Tigrius retreated and immediately triggered the next magic. He could not afford to save the magic numbers that he had memorized. Various colored lights filled the space between the two. Their dazzling splendor was comparable to the sky of the demon world. Tigrius' excellent hearing captured even the slightest noises that he would not have to hear, and that sensitivity could sometimes be his weakness. If you can see it. Feel free if you can feel it. It was oversupply. For Yong-Ho, who was concentrating on the flow of magic, he felt shocked as if the whole world was filled with magical light. Then, Tigrius fired energy missiles in succession. Dozens of energy lumps hit Yong-Ho like a bomb strike. This time, Tigrius felt instinctively that his attack was successful. However, most of his attacks did not do any damage. Green flames bloomed. Tigrius' elaborate attack backfired. Yong-Ho blocked a barrage of energy missiles with a shield of jamming, the power embedded in Chwiryong's ring. He recovered himself by causing green flames to block the magic power surrounding him. Tigrius laughed bitterly. Indeed, Yong-Ho wasn't an ordinary opponent. It was no coincidence that Yong-Ho defeated Foras and Junkeros in succession before beating Agares. However, Tigrius was not yet ready to give up. Rather, he was thinking about victory even at this moment. Carrying the cane, Tigrius changed his posture. Rather than increasing the distance with Yong-Ho again, he rushed as if he wanted to have a head-to-head fight. The green flames disappeared at once. Yong-Ho, who came out of the green flames he had created himself, swung Aemon at Tigrius, who charged from the front. Rather than avoiding the attack, Tigrius swung his cane at Aemon. There was a thunderous roar. It was more than imagined. It was so powerful that Yong-Ho felt a lingering throbbing on both arms. Strength, a strength-enhancing magic, and haste, a speed-enhancing magic. It wasn't just all there was. Tigrius carried a total of 5 sub-magics on his body, which drastically enhanced his physical ability that was already powerful enough. It was true that one should not be deceived by the appearance of an old man. Judging from his look, Foras was also an old man anyway. Tigrius turned to Blink again. This time, he appeared from Yong-Ho's right side and swung his cane. Yong-ho barely escaped the attack. He was not wielding his cane recklessly. His swinging was refined and skillful, in a sharp contrast to Fora's beastly movement. Obviously, he mastered specific martial arts for a long time. Tigrius used various kinds of magic even amid the head-to-head fighting. Attack magic such as energy missiles, as well as close-range magic such as grease, confused Yong-ho, but he endured them well. He was never dominated by Tigrius. It was true that Tigrius' physical abilities drastically improved. However, Yong-ho's physical strength was not far behind him. In fact, Yong-ho's body underwent a complete change for the better. Tigrius apparently honed his skills for many years. But what about his actual battle experience? When it came to the battle that risked his life, Yong-ho had far more experience than Tigrius. No matter what others said, Yong-ho already experienced virtual death hundreds of times. Yong-ho's action exceeded Tigrius' expectations. The moment Tigrius thought he would step back, Yong-ho moved forward even at the risk of his life. Obviously, he acted as if he left everything to providence. Oh no, Tigrius doubted Yong-ho's action was thoroughly calculated. It was far from his reliance on luck or recklessness. Tigrius could confirm it in his eyes. Bang Amon poured out, pressing Tigrius' cane and fixing it on the ground. It did not stop there and released intense green flames. Green flames surged splendidly toward Tigrius, as if a hawk soared in the sky. Tigrius was close by, so he did not have enough time to activate Blink. No, maybe he already used up all of his available Blink. During that short moment, Yong-ho's eyes met his. Tigrius let go of his hand that was holding the cane. The green flames swept over Tigrius. This time, Tigrius surpassed his expectations. Tigrius took one step further. The green flames scattered without harming him. It was not because Yong-ho weakened the intensity of the green flames to save his life. The flame shield. It was a flame barrier that Tigrius had prepared for today's duel, a secret weapon that protected him from fire attacks. On the premise that he would be helped by his cane, Tigrius could use 3 magics at the same time. Nevertheless, the reason he used only 2 magics until now was because he wanted to maintain the flame shield. As for the green flames that Yong-ho shot at him first, Tigrius didn't have to avoid it because he would have endured them with the power of the flame shield. But he avoided the green flames excessively to seize the moment to reverse the tide. The flame shield burned red. Tigrius did not spare his magic. Charging at Yong-ho immediately, he concentrated magic on his right hand. The blade of pure white magic soared up. The green flames didn't work because Tigrius was too close for Yong-ho to use the spear. The flame shield would serve as a barrier against not only the green flames, but also other attacks by Yong-ho. Right at this moment, the goddess of victory turned to Tigrius himself. It was a perfect checkmate. But the moment Tigrius was about to declare victory, he saw something strange. Yong-ho also let go of Aemon. Then, he rushed forward as if to narrow the distance with Tigrius. It seemed as if he was throwing himself into the blazing flame shield. Was he reckless? No, Tigrius could feel Yong-ho's magic power, though not as much as he. Tigrius was amazed at the magic energy that he should feel at this moment. An intense chill enveloped his body. Something from the magic field on Yong-ho's left hand broke the flame shield. The flame shield was broken like a thin glass window before the intense chill. 2 attributes. It wasn't just magic. It was pure magic. That was why Tigrius was all the more astonished. How could Yong-ho do this? Tigrius couldn't think any further. After destroying the flame shield, Yong-ho punched him endlessly. Tigrius used his last available blink to retreat. Since it happened instantly, he could not even think of attacking Yong-ho from his back. And Yong-ho now chased him. He rushed toward Tigrius without any hesitation, as if he knew the old man would retreat. Blink was definitely a magic that helped one to leap through space. So it was impossible to notice one's leaping process between the origin and destination points. But it wasn't a magical power. The magic power at the destination point was distorted. It would have been difficult to detect Tigrius if he had moved back as he did, but this time he operated Blink within Yong-ho's view. Amon was now held again in Yong-ho's hand. However, an intense chill was still coming out from the magic field of his left hand. Tigrius could not be sure which of the 2 was the real one that tormented him, but he had no time to think. He exercised the power of the Demon King. He combined two magics into one beyond his limits. The flame shield against flames, the aqua shield against chills. Yong-ho clearly witnessed that the two colors and attributes became one before his eyes. That was why he didn't stop. Yong-ho lifted Amon high above his head and struck against the barrier that Tigrius had set up. At that moment, a lightning bolt struck, which was not a metaphor, but a real thunderbolt. It was a lightning strike. The third attribute of his magic neutralized the attributes of the flame shield and aqua shield. Tigrius was astonished, and so were the demons of the House of Mammon who was watching it. They knew early on that Yong-ho had the attributes of fire and chill, but a lightning strike. There was no such thing. Of course, Yong-ho didn't learn the lightning strike magic, but Skull understood it. The Brigada necklace was absorbing Skull's own magic. In no time, Catalina sensed it, too. She felt that she was being united with Yong-ho. Her dark magic was being delivered to Yong-ho through Brigada, which had the attribute of darkness. Since her energy was exhausted instantly, she felt some pain, but her heart was filled with a deep sense of fidelity that she was being united with her master. Her joy was greater than her pain. Yong-ho could deliver the magical power of greed to his subordinate demons through Brigada. That was why they could add greed to their magical power until now. Brigada's role was to amplify, respond, and save magic power. The greed embedded in Brigada absorbed the magic of the subordinate demons and got delivered to Yong-ho. The next step that Guxian mentioned, the reason why he said that in order to bring out Brigada's true power, the subordinate demons should also become stronger. Yong-ho realized it himself and exercised it in the real battle. Catalina's black magic was condensed into Amon that he lifted high. Yong-ho then struck it again, as if to show off Catalina's strength. Her black magic that transformed into a huge sword completely destroyed Tigrius' shield. Crushed by the overwhelming force, Tigrius could no longer withstand it. He helplessly flopped down. Amon did not harm Tigrius, and the black magic only cut the air. Tigrius gasped for breath. He looked at Yong-ho with trembling eyes, and he understood that it was time for him to implement the contract. I admit defeat. You're the head of the House of Mammon? No, my lord. He admitted defeat completely. Yong-ho also breathed roughly. Using Brigada was quite difficult for him, because he was not familiar with it, but he withdrew Amon with a smile. He also took back the chill from the magic field on his left arm, then reached out. He raised Tigrius by himself and said, "Welcome, Tigrius, the wizard of the House of Mammon." Tigrius laughed bitterly at his new title. Instead of complaining about it, he once again expressed his respect for Yong-ho as his subject. It was the moment when the two families of Mammon and Randolph became one. Chapter 113. Dungeon Making. 1. An unexpected blow was always painful. Embryo, the demon king of the wolves, sat on the walls of the newly occupied city and looked far away. He looked toward the north, not the west or south that he used to. Meanwhile, Embryo's operation went well. The family heads in the western region didn't dare to leave on an expedition to the north when their own dungeons were in danger. Although there were some who attempted to advance to the north, they often ended up ending their expedition shortly. Nobody knew where Embryo's core dungeon was. The northern region had been already occupied by Embryo. It was unreasonable for them to go on a faraway expedition when their dungeons were in danger. There were several reasons. That was why Embryo could keep pressing those family heads in the western region. He could keep driving them into a corner. He could force them to choose a single-round match. But something unexpected happened. The reasons that covered Embryo could be sustained only when the family heads in the western region made a rational judgment. But they gave up everything, who was like revenge demons earnestly hoping for Embryo's ruin. So, those reasons could not be accepted by them. They were willing to sacrifice themselves to set fire to a forest named Embryo. Most of them were survivors. They were not only children or brothers or relatives of the family heads in the northern and western regions trampled by Embryo, but also their loyal dungeon demons. And they attacked the north. They didn't think of retreating. They attacked Embryo's dungeons or front lines at the risk of their lives and succeeded in inflicting considerable damages to Embryo. Of course, Embryo's forces were not to be defeated by their sporadic guerrilla battles. If they'd been such a weak force in the first place, they could not have subdued the northern region. Embryo put an end to the turmoil in the north. within a relatively short period of time and pressured on the family heads in the western region. However, it was clear that he had a setback in the plan. After all, the time required to end the turmoil was described as short at first, but it proved relatively short. In fact, Embryo had to exhaust a considerable amount of time to do that. The family heads in the western region, exhausted from being chased by Embryo endlessly, bought some time for a break. They began to look for ways to use revenge demons. That was why Embryo went out of his way. In a situation where the supply line linking the north was in jeopardy, he achieved the feat of attacking one of the western cities in an ambush and occupied it. Overnight, one of the wolves wandering around Embryo looked down at the wall. Death Knight stood in front of a mountain of corpses piled up as a warning sign. Behind his back, who was standing with a huge sword as if he were a gatekeeper, a purple magic power close to black rose like a haze. The powerful undead was supposed to radiate the energy of death around it, and such energy of death altered the magical power omnipotent in the demon world. The undead began to rise among the crowd of corpses. Of course, their number was small, and most of the newly produced undead were zombies that were hard to be called undead at best, but they couldn't be ignored at all. The wolf that was staring at Death Knight frowned. Hugin, the wisest of the wolves following Embryo, discovered that Death Knight's action was a sort of an armed demonstration. It was true that the powerful undead radiated the energy of death. However, a powerful undead could keep such energy hidden from outsiders. Obviously, Death Knight didn't try to reinforce his force by increasing the number of zombies. That Death Knight was showing off his ability to create the new undead simply by radiating the energy of death by himself. And his show-off was not directed toward the family heads in the western region. Obviously, it was directed toward Embryo on the wall. But Embryo didn't care. He felt that the outright hostility of the surveillant became a little more concrete. Rather, it was a good sign to him. If the surveillant had sincerely been wary of Embryo, he would have posed an invisible threat instead of such a childish act. Embryo stroked Huggin's head. His gaze toward the north turned to the east and south this time. It seemed that he could occupy the western region sooner or later. Plauros, the demon king who could be called the head of the Western Owners Alliance, was by no means a fool. Further expansion of the front was not beneficial to the Western Owners Alliance. It would be possible for them to attack Embryo's rear to some extent by using revenge demons, but it would be nothing more than their desperate efforts that could not affect the general situation. Be it a single-round match or a thorough defense, there was no choice but to mobilize the forces now. The damages in the western region were too big to continue a war of attrition. That was why Embryo concluded that the western region would be occupied sooner or later. So, he thought of the east and the south, his next target after occupying the western region. The eastern region was still in turmoil. The big chaos and turmoil that Embryo caused awakened those with ambitions in the eastern region. It was the so-called warring states period. It would take a considerable time for the turmoil in the eastern region to subside. The eastern region was wide. There were also quite a few powerful demon kings. If somebody could subdue the period of confusion and unify the state, he could be a strong rival of Embryo himself. However, Embryo wanted to pay more attention to the southern region than the eastern region. A wind was blowing in the southern region. The sudden wind began to swallow everything in the region. It wasn't surprising that the new strongman defeated those family heads there, but it was something that raised Embryo's attention that he took the free city after defeating Agares. In the southern region, there were no houses with strong power like those in the west, and there were not many families like those in the east. That was why Embryo had ignored the southern area the most. Until now, he thought it was a place that he could easily take immediately after occupying the west. However, the time came for Embryo to think differently about the southern region. The House of Mammon. It was the very house where that great king of greed was born. Although it lost its past glory, it once had the name of the king during the old days. Embryo, you don't have the power of sin, so you can't be a king. Embryo recalled the fortune teller Nagas' words, who he trampled in the north. Instead of thinking of something positive or negative, Embryo simply turned around. He muttered softly, "Is he the demon king of flames, the new divinity that has risen from the southern region?" the new Demon King bearing the name of the House of Mammon on his back. The wind blew. With the energy of death, it blew toward the north. Name, Tigrius Randalt, male. Race, Magius Mine, 7U7U, XB017U, 7USD. TF Category, Demon King of Union. Attribute, Flame Level 3, Individual Nature. Prudent, Upright, Honest. Individual Aptitude. Intellect, Magic, Power. Evolution, EXP, 7U17. Strength Specialization, Level 221. Physical Strength Specialization, Level 325. Intellect Specialization, Level 43, Magic Power. Level 43, Skill Specialization, Level 425. Thanks to the effect of the contract, Yong-ho could observe Tigrius' evolution information in great detail, even though he had not yet made him his subordinate demon. What caught Yong-ho's interest more than anything else was his other name, the Demon King of Union. Is it also his last magic? During the battle, Tigrius' two different magics merged into one, and they were completely different properties like fire and water. When it came to magic, Yong-ho was close to a layman, but it didn't mean he had no commonsensical knowledge of it at all. As far as he knew, two magics could not become one like that. Closing his green eyes, he pondered for a moment. He spoke to Tigrius in a low voice, who remained silent after declaring that he would become Yong-ho's subordinate. Is the Demon King of Union your other name? Since he had been accustomed to speaking to Eligos informally, he could ask Tigrius the same way. At that moment, Tigrius replied with his eyes glaring, "Yes, Lord, that is my name as a Demon King." The power of the Demon King was not given by providence. He obtained the power by awakening the possibility of his own soul as the Demon King. Therefore, the name of the Demon King could be called the name of the soul. Tigrius tried to suppress his curiosity. Yong-ho's different name, known to the public, was the Demon King of Flames. Tigrius thought so until now, but he didn't think it was true. Just as Yong-ho was deeply impressed by Tigrius' magic of merging two into one, Tigrius was also greatly shocked by his free attribute transformation. Moreover, this time, Yong-ho accurately found out Tigrius' other name. There was a possibility that Yong-ho guessed right after watching him merge the two magics, but Tigrius' intuition denied such a flimsy possibility. When his green eyes flashed, it was clear that some magic power was triggered. Maybe it was not his attribute transformation, but the power that he just showed. So, Tigrius got curious and wanted to know. However, Tigrius himself was now a subject of the House of Mammon, so he could not ask his lord to reveal the secret. The power of the Demon King was the best weapon the Demon King had, so asking him to reveal the secret of such power was like asking a warrior for his sword. Tigrius took a deep breath. Yong-ho, and he had a different status. Yong-ho was his master, while Tigrius was his vassal. The master had to know clearly what power his vassal had, so he could use his subordinate's power in the right place. Tigrius was good at making himself clear. Now that he pledged to become Yong-ho's subordinate through the contract, he did not consider himself more than a vassal of the House of Mammon. So, he explained to Yong-ho about his power in a soft voice, which could not be heard around him. Chapter 114, Dungeon Making 2. I have the power to unite two different objects into one, even though it's temporary, but it's not possible for anything. After I first obtained this power, I tested many ways and concluded that combining magic was the most useful, and as a result, I've come to take the path of a wizard as im now, combine two different things. At that moment, Yong-ho momentarily recalled his own evolution of union. Excuse me, but can you show it to me? No problem. Tigrius, who answered readily this time, opened both hands. Since the magic that he had memorized was almost exhausted, he activated a simple magic that did not require much preparation. Fire arrow in the right hand, fire arrow in the left hand, an arrow of flames formed on his hands. Tigrius made eye contact with Yong-ho. Slowly, he brought his hands together in front of his chest, then clasped his hands finally. He shouted, "Combination magic!" Fire ballista, and opened his hands wide. At that moment, a huge arrow of fire formed on his palms. It was huge enough to befit the name ballista. I can combine the same magic to further strengthen it, or I can combine different magic to create a new one. After cancelling Fire Ballista, he activated the magic once again. This time, it was not the same magic. Strength in the right hand, haste in the left hand, combination magic. Booster. It didn't have as much of a visual effect as the one a moment ago. However, Yong-ho could see the color and properties of the magic directly. He gulped, watching the miracle on Tigrius' hands. It was thanks to this magic combination that Tigrius could carry several auxiliary magic on his body, for 2 magic combinations brought about the same effect as using 4 auxiliary magics. The more Yong-ho saw it, the more magnificent he felt about it. It was indeed an appropriate choice that Tigrius decided to use the power of magic combination. A magic layman, Yong-ho could think of various magic combinations at that moment. So, it was needless to say how many magic combinations Tigrius, a real wizard, could think of. What if Yong-ho could evolve Tigrius? What kind of achievement could Tigrius show if he led the wizard to a higher place than now? By the way, such power was only possessed by the Demon King. Tigrius was now Yong-ho's subordinate. If he could unleash the power of evolution, Tigrius had to be subjugated to Yong-ho himself. In other words, he had to be Yong-ho's subordinate spirit, not the head of the House of Randalt anymore. What would happen to his power when Tigrius was not the Demon King anymore? Could he lose it? If that was the case, it would be regrettable. Yong-ho wanted to maintain Tigrius' power while having him under his command. "You don't have to worry too much," whispered Ophelia, noticing Yong-ho's concern. Yong-ho signaled to Tigrius, appropriately then turned to Ophelia. She explained quickly and briefly, "As you know, the power of the Demon King is manifested from the soul of the Demon King. Ascending to the position of the Demon King can be said to be an opportunity to awaken. Then, does it mean that his power is still maintained even when he steps down from the position of the Demon King? Not really. It is true that the position of Demon King itself exerts considerable power in maintaining power. To get straight to the point, anybody who has been in the position of the Demon King for a long time can still use his power even if he loses his position, because power is the manifestation of the power of the soul. However, his power would be weaker than before. There is no way he can avoid it." According to her explanation, Tigrius would still be able to exert his power even if he lost his position as the Demon King. Yong-ho was not sure about the duration of "for a long time" when she mentioned it, but Tigrius reigned as the head of the House of Randalt longer than Foras. In fact, the duration of his reign itself would not be a problem. When Yong-ho sighed as if he was relieved, Ophelia smiled brightly. Then she continued, "And the results can vary, depending on how you can merge the House of Randalt, because Tigrius can serve you while maintaining his position as the Demon King. And actually, this is more common. The 6 kings are also governing their kingdom in this way." Yong-ho nodded. The power of his evolution has not stopped growing. If Yong-ho himself became stronger, he could unleash the power of evolution, even if he didn't make Tigrius his subordinate spirit. After a brief conversation with Ophelia, Yong-ho approached Tigrius again. He told Tigrius what Ophelia reported. "I hear that the main force of the House of Mammon started, so we're going to wait here to join them before heading for the House of Randalt, as I told you before." "Okay, I will inform the dungeon of the House of Randalt in advance." That was why Yong-ho stayed in the wilderness even though the duel was over. He could not go and take over the House of Randalt with his current force. Of course, he didn't suspect Tigrius, for Tigrius, whom Yong-ho met only briefly, would break his oath. There were 2 reasons why he mobilized his main force. First, he needed to put down the possible rebellion by the subordinate spirits of the House of Randalt without armed conflict. And secondly, he would need considerable manpower to rebuild the dungeon there. Deborah, a subordinate spirit of the House of Randalt, acted at Tigrius' order and contacted the dungeon through telepathy. As a special spirit, she could exchange telepathy with her twin sister, no matter how far they were from each other. Now that Yong-ho settled almost everything with Tigrius, all he had to do was wait for the main force led by Rickham. The new power of Brigada. Yong-ho looked back at the ring on his hand, then turned to Catalina and Skull. It wasn't just Catalina and Skull alone that felt connected to Yong-ho. Yong-ho also felt a strong bond when using their magic power. He didn't make any calculated thinking that he would use those spirits with higher utility value as his subordinates. For that reason, the moment he felt connected to these subordinate spirits, their feelings were so pure Skull laughed at Yongho's gaze, and Catalina fluttered her ears and tail needlessly. Yongho gently touched the ring, then turned back and looked west. 2 days later, he arrived at the dungeon of the House of Randold. He immediately started renovating the dungeon. The renovation started from the heart of the dungeon. After pondering for the past 2 days, Yongho made a decision on how to merge the House of Randold with his. Tigrius Randold would retain his Demon King status. First of all, Yongho would maintain a simple master-slave relationship instead of having him as his subordinate spirit. Of course, Yongho would have him go back to his original status as a subordinate spirit, but not now. The dungeon of the Randolt House was the first expanded base that Yongho acquired, and at the same time, it was a shield to block the forces from the western region. Yongho could not afford to stay at the Randolt House for that long. Even before the attack on the west began, he had to break through one more arena first, and, if possible, he had to explore the Labyrinth of Greed. That was why it was better to keep the position of the head of the House of Randolt for now. Moreover, Tigrius' power was very useful. Since it was certain that his power would be weakened if Yongho made him his subordinate spirit, he could not weaken the strength of the friendly force recklessly. Of course, this rests on the assumption that Tigrius won't betray me. So, it took 2 days for Yongho to make the decision. Yongho already trusted Tigrius wholeheartedly, for he was moved by Tigrius' attitude before and after the duel. However, he needed a little more time for more reasonable judgment. It was a very important issue. If Tigrius betrayed him during the battle, an irreversible situation would occur. So, Yongho had to arrange a safety device. And the first safeguard was the control of the heart of the dungeon. Master, how can you hear my voice? Lucius' voice was heard from the heart of the dungeon in the deepest part of the House of Randolt. Her voice wasn't very clear. He felt like Lucius' voice was distant, as if he picked up a phone with poor reception, and there were also noises that interfered with their conversation when she spoke. Yongho slightly tweaked the position of the remote communication unit attached to the heart of the dungeon. Next to him, Tigrius improved his connection with Lucia by controlling the letters of light that floated in the air. Lucius' voice flowing from the dungeon's soul became more and more clear. Ayu-he-ho. Can you hear me? If you hear me, please answer me. Tu bichubi bop bop. My master is a fool. Yongho blushed when Lucius' voice continued. He could have smiled at her if he had been in the House of Mammon, but this place was the House of Randolt with Tigrius standing beside him. Yongho said in a soft voice after clearing his throat several times as if to hide his embarrassment. Lucia Higuk, master. This time I can't hear you well. I think the communication status is bad. It was a white lie. Yongho grinned when he thought of this girl with blue hair who was desperately pretending otherwise. It seems you and I are well connected. Hee, you know I love you, my master. Instead of answering, Yongho pretended to hit her forehead in the air. As the communication status improved, Lucia, who was connected to Yongho via the heart of the dungeon of the House of Randolt, responded with a laugh. Watching all this, Tigrius said, "She's very peculiar." Ha! She has a lot of emotion. I didn't see a lot of dungeon souls. But I have never seen a dungeon soul like her. It didn't sound like he mentioned it without any reason. There was a little curiosity in Tigrius' eyes, like a wizard, really. Blurring a bit, Yongho looked back at the heart of the dungeon. Then he said while touching the remote communications device, "Lucia, can you feel your friend here? I'm going to subjugate some of the dungeon functions of the Randolt House to the dungeon of the Mammon House. The dungeon soul here will guide you. So finish the work." Okay. Lucia. Chapter 15, Dungeon Making 3. Lucia spoke vigorously. Unlike when she was in the Mammon House, only her voice was heard now, so not only Yongho, but Tigrius could hear it. Yongho felt a lot of expectation in Lucia's voice. It seemed that she was excited to meet the souls of another dungeon for the first time. Yongho wasn't as excited as Lucia, but he earnestly waited for the replies of the dungeon soul of the House of Randolt. While Lucia's heart was pounding in excitement, there was a reply from the dungeon soul of the House of Randolt. A new communication line with the dungeon soul of the House of Mammon is opened. It seems that it will take about 10 minutes to do this. It was a hard female voice. It seemed that the female didn't want to reply to Lucia's greetings. Sullen, I will help you with the work. Lucia spoke briefly, but apparently she was disappointed. The sullen face of this blue-haired girl with her shoulders drooping came to Yongho's mind. Yongho turned back to Tigrius and asked, "Is that the typical response? Most of the dungeon souls I've met are like that." "I think my dungeon soul is perhaps more common than Lucia." Tigrius had no reason to lie, but it seemed that Lucia was really a special spirit. That's good to know. From Yongho's point of view, a cheerful Lucia was much better. When the communication line with Lucia is completed, we will start renovating the dungeon. I explained to you on the way, but am thinking of making this a fortress. The new dungeon will be very different from it now, said Yongho. Yongho seemed to feel sorry for Tigrius. Tigrius looked at Yongho differently from when he witnessed Lucius' rich emotions. Then he replied with a warm smile reminiscent of Eligos. "That's fine. I think you need the renovation to stop the forces from the western region. I understand. Thank you for your consideration." After he expressed gratitude duly, Tigrius recovered his usual look. His face was that of an old gentleman who gave out the aura of a serious nobleman with gravitas. While Lucia occupied some of the functions of the house at Randalt, Yongho headed for the makeshift lodge of the House of Mammon, arranged in one corner of the House of Randalt. Originally, Tigrius wanted to provide Yongho with the Demon King's room and his own bedroom as the accommodation for the Mammon House spirits, but Yongho declined it. Tigrius was still the head of the House of Randalt, so Yongho wanted to respect it. Of course, that was not the only reason. A guest room is much better for me. It would not be pleasant for Yongho to take someone else's bedroom, especially that of an old gentleman like Tigrius. Moreover, Yongho did not intend to settle down in the House of Randalt for good. When the dungeon renovation was completed to some extent, he planned to return to the House of Mammon to break through the arena. The spirits of the House of Mammon, waiting at the lodge, welcomed back Yongho. Accompanied by Ophelia, Skull, and Catalina alone, Yongho moved to the guest bedrooms. Sensing the reason why he called her to his bedroom, Ophelia said, gently pressing on her pounding heart, "I would like to ask for the evolution of my physical strength." Yongho laughed. Although Ophelia changed into a fox-like girl from a veteran tavern hostess who had gone through ups and downs, her sharp eyes remained the same. Not magic power, but physical strength. Yes, because balance is important, especially for red demons like me and Brother Eli. Physical ability is as important as magic power. For the red demons, magic is merely the means to strengthen their body. The basis of strength is not magic power, but physical ability. Her detailed explanation was quite reasonable. However, Yongho was bothered by something unusual. She mentioned Brother Eli, because Brother Eligos' name is too long. I like Eli. It's like his nickname. Ophelia laughed brightly, which made Yongho frown. He said grumly, recalling Eligos' face. "Let's start." Ophelia laughed again, this time. She closed her eyes, then stretched her body comfortably. Yongho took his breath. He put his hands on her shoulders and tried to empty his head. It had already been proven in several cases that Yongho's own thought had some influence on his appearance after going through an evolution. He made sure that his envy, not suitable for a master like him, shouldn't have any effect on her appearance. Yongho thought about good things as much as possible. Then he activated the power of evolution. There was no violent external change, but a violent change took place within her body. The strengthening of the body itself. Her bones became harder. Both her internal organs and muscles were strengthened, and her skin became more elastic, and he could not describe it accurately, but the aura of Ophelia changed a little. Had she become more attractive? He seemed to hear Amon murmuring that he felt so because of his mood or agony. Shaking his head, Yongho concentrated. New boxes of light floated above Ophelia's head. Red Demon Breaker. Red Demon Vanguard. Both were new routes to level advancement. Even though the evolution was over, Yongho's green eyes were still shining. Watching him, Ophelia gulped before she knew it. Seeing there was something going on, she quietly waited for his next move. Instead of saying something, Yongho touched the boxes of light in the air one by one, and he saw something different from before. It was the same as before, but a translucent silhouette was drawn over Ophelia's body whenever he touched them. However, the type of silhouette was different. This time, transformation. Is it like a battle mode? Even after leveling up, Ophelia's appearance did not change much. However, she had some other look during the battle. Unlike her usual look, the Red Demon Breaker was an aggressive type. After switching to battle mode, Ophelia turned into a wild figure reminiscent of a feline beast. Her hands were stronger, and her legs were longer and firmer, and black patterns appeared all over her red skin. On the other hand, Red Demon Vanguard was a speed type. Unlike Breaker, whose physique itself was getting bigger as a whole, Vanguard changed Ophelia's body shape more slenderly, but she looked very agile. It was obvious that she could move much faster. Now Yong-ho intended to have Ophelia choose one. Since her advancement was possible only after her evolution EXP maxed, she had plenty of time to think about it. Let me have high hopes for Eligos. What was the next step for Red Demon Beast? How much wilder could it turn? After grinning, Yong-ho let go of his hands from Ophelia's shoulders. He briefly explained to her about the advancement to Ophelia, who opened her eyes wide instead of asking what was going on. Next was Skull's turn. If Ophelia was the busiest spirit in the dungeon of the House of Mammon externally, Skull was the one who spent the most time training. Although Skull could no longer collect EXP properly even in the intermediate training ground, he did not roll around the floor quietly. Skull trained his unit endlessly, literally 24 hours a day. While Ophelia quickly gained her EXP by sparring with Eligos and through her tight schedule, Skull gained evolution EXP through training. Skull evolved mainly toward increasing his physical abilities such as physical strength and build. But things were different now. Skull was not just a warrior, but a magic warrior who knew how to use magic power. Yong-ho, who put his hand on the head of Skull, kneeling before him, applied the evolution of magic power on him. The magical power that more clearly revealed its presence than before after merging with Skeleton Mage was transformed into a larger and stronger form. Yong-ho felt lightning from Skull. But I still don't think of his advancement stage. Yong-ho felt sorry for it. After all, it seemed that there was still a long way for Skull to move up to a Death Knight. After completing the evolution of Skull, Catalina looked at Yong-ho with an expectant expression this time. Yong-ho grinned mischievously at her, flapping her tail, then gently hit her on the forehead and said, "Did you already forget that you evolved after breaking through the first floor?" Your greedy Catalina responded by drooping her ears and tail. Yong-ho stroked her hair and said to everyone again, "Anyway, for the next few days, I will focus on planning dungeon remodeling because it needs a major renovation. Maybe I need to reorganize the dungeon once I also have to buy the necessary materials." Just like a dungeon located along the route to the western region, the dungeon of the House of Randolph was already quite in combative form. But that wasn't enough. Yong-ho intended to turn the dungeon into an indomitable fortress. Fortunately, Tigrius obediently followed his intention because he knew well that it was the only choice to prevent attacks from the western region. On that day, Yong-ho immediately planned a draft of the fortress in cooperation with Tigrius and Ophelia, and the next day he reorganized the dungeon. It was different from the previous reorganization of the first floor of the dungeon of the House of Mammon in the past. When Yong-ho implemented the dungeon reorganization, the first floor of the House of Mammon was really small. It would take 3 days to reorganize the dungeon. After that, they would need to spend a considerable amount of time laying the foundation for the full-scale fortification of the dungeon. Yong-ho delegated the supervision of the whole remodeling process to Ophelia and Tigrius. He had Skull and his unit on standby as the security guard. Then he headed back to the House of Mammon, accompanied by Catalina alone. "I'm going to come back here after breaking through the 9th floor of the arena, no, 10th floor. Salami, the spirit of flames with the House of Mammon, carried Yong-ho and Catalina on his wings and spread them. It left the traces of flames in the sky of the demon world." Chapter 116. Demon King of Distortion 1. What was the most powerful one among the numerous races in the demon world? There were lots of disagreements about it. However, there was one race that had been always mentioned among them. It was the dragons. They were both the king of flying animals as well as the king of wild animals. They possessed a particularly strong body among the beings of the demon world, and they were born with powerful mana befitting their strong bodies. Often called ancient dragons, who lived long enough, they could be said to be a disaster in themselves. They were like a god, and the representation of a strong man, who reached the ultimate level in both physical strength and mana. And there was one who stood at the top among those dragons, Although he didn't have the 7 deadly sins, he rose to the position of king. In the history of the demon world, he was the only one who rose to the position of king without possessing the 7 deadly sins. People called him the King of Violence. Great Dragon Lord. The King of Violence was like a mountain. Interestingly, this expression satisfied both its substance and metaphor. The giant body of the King of Violence was several hundred meters long. Even though it curled up, roiling its tail, it could not hide its giant body. The King of Violence never acted recklessly. Like the name Violence, he was an extremely powerful being, but he did not use his power anytime, anywhere. He was like a volcano. Normally, he remained silent, but once he showed his anger, the whole world was shaken. The King of Violence awakened from a deep sleep. However, he did not open his eyes or move his body. It was only his mind that awoke. The King of Violence thought about his unsurpassed magic power, which could be called part of his body. He connected his soul with one of the 7 fragments of that demon king godly energy, and the 7 deadly sins shared their history. Since ancient times, when the demon king disappeared, godly energy changed many hands, which never forgot them. The traces of some of their unsurpassed magic power were left behind, though they were small, and there was one that left the biggest traces in the annals of godly energy. The King of Greed. In magic, its owner's soul and memory were supposed to exist. The King of Greed's magic power was great enough to be recorded as unsurpassed abilities. Although fragmentary, there were some great moments of his magic power recorded. Then, why did the King of Greed suddenly disappear? Who was it that took his life? The King of Violence tried to sleep quietly. He peeked into the memories of godly energy. Thanks to Salami flying almost half a day, though he took a break on and off, Yongho could reach the dungeon of the House of Mammon before dark. The Chimeri cats, which mainly monitored the ground, were flustered at Yongho's sudden appearance. So he told them to watch over the airspace as well, and stroked their heads one by one. Watching him, Catalina touched her own head slightly. It was Trient, one of the veteran spirits of the House of Mammon, that greeted Yongho after the Chimeri cats. Now fully established himself as the main gatekeeper of the House of Mammon, Trient bowed to Yongho, along with the other 2 Trients that he had bought recently. Repeating evolutionary changes, they had a much more flexible and tougher body than the typical Trient. However, they were essentially trees, so they could easily perform motions that ordinary Trients could not. After the Chimeri cats and Trient, Elagos came out to greet Yongho along with Baduk and Yuria. "Congratulations on your victory," Master Elagos spoke with glaring eyes. Elagos had been serving as the butler since the time when the House of Mammon was on the verge of collapse. It was natural that Elagos felt so proud of Yongho, because he made the House of Mammon stand tall again and took over another dungeon. Baduk, who was next to Elagos, expressed happiness more honestly, while Yuria slightly lifted her sleeves to show due respect to Yongho, saying lispingly, "Well, congratulations." Yongho laughed loudly like Skull and stroked Yuria's hair. Then he headed for the Demon King's room with Catalina, who was touching her hair again this time, and Elagos, who started to wipe his tears with a handkerchief. "Master, take a good rest. It must have been difficult for Salami to fly all day long, but you know our master also had a hard time hanging on Salami for the whole day." "Right." Lucius spoke in a quiet way, feeling like he sat on the throne for a long time. Yongho nodded at her. As Lucius said, he was exhausted, so he was thinking of taking a break today, but he had some more work to do. Yongho grinned at Elagos after looking at him with the power of evolution. "It's what I have expected." The fact that Ophelius Evolution EXP maxed out meant that Elagos did the same thing, for the 2 always practiced together. "Can I still evolve?" When Yongho's green eyes glared, Elagos asked him with an expectant voice. It was natural that Elagos showed such a reaction. Elagos came from the demon world. Moreover, he was a member of the Red Daemon called the Battle Race. He had no reason to refuse to become stronger through evolution. Instead of answering right away, Yongho rested his chin on his right hand. Then he looked at Elagos with his eyes slightly open. He did so for a few seconds when Elagos felt nervous, then said, "Ophelia asked me to evolve the magic power of Brother Eli." Elagos cleared his throat when Yongho emphasized Brother Eli. Obviously, he was embarrassed, feeling pleasant but angry at the same time. Yong-ho asked, "Do you have any nickname for her?" No. I just call her Ophelia. Her name itself is pretty." Oops. At that moment, Yong-ho laughed wickedly like the Demon King, and Elagos was flustered, muttering something like he was brainwashed. Originally, Elagos was a red demon whose skin was red, but today it looked much redder. Fortunately for Elagos, Yong-ho knew when to refrain himself. In fact, if he dug more about Elagos' relationship with Ophelia, Yong-ho felt he would be hurt, so he stopped. Anyway, he stopped playing games with Elagos and stood up. "Let me evolve you with a specialization of magic power. So, close your eyes." Since Yong-ho changed the topic, Elagos closed his eyes, feeling relieved. Yong-ho activated the power of evolution. He brought out Elagos' possibilities, which changed the latter in no time. Elagos' magic power became strong. Besides, it was accompanied by his physical change this time. A third horn came out from his forehead. Pricking her ears and hearing their conversation with her eyes open, Catalina once again opened her eyes wider. The difference between having 2 horns and 3 horns was like night and day. Moreover, a new box of light appeared above Elagos' head. Red Demon Tyrant. Like Ophelia, the box was 1, not 2, but the name itself was really strong. Tyrant following the beast first, it was a tyrant this time. Yong-ho instinctively touched the box of light and looked at Elagos, who just went through an evolution. He was the same as Ophelia. In addition to his usual form, he had a separate combat form. Elagos seemed to understand why he was named Tyrant. Even now, he had a well-developed upper body with an inverted triangle, but his combat shape was more than that. In particular, his shoulders and arms were developed, and his 2 fists full of hair looked like a wicked blunt weapon by itself. Perhaps the combination of a bear and a gorilla would look like Elagos. In any case, it was clear that Elagos gave out the aura of a wild beast. The black patterns among the hair growing all over his body also stood out. He looks like a super beast, Yong-ho thought. He withdrew his hands and deactivated the power of evolution. By the way, suddenly, something strange came to Yong-ho's mind. Red Demon Tyrant. Obviously, the name befitted Elagos, who went through an evolution. But Elagos felt uncomfortable about it. Why not only Elagos but also Catalina and Ophelia felt the same way. A new name after advancement. They understood the new names of Goblin Rangers and Skull after evolution. Hobgoblin was the superior species of a goblin. In the case of Skull, he was an artificially born undead, so it was natural that there were higher species such as Skeleton Soldier and Warrior. But what about Red Demon or Dark Elf? Well, Catalina had the mixed blood of Dark Elf and Succubus, but it was not an exaggeration to say that she was walking on her own path now. Although her physical abilities were strong enough to be confused as a human being, she was a human after all. On the contrary, the owner of the body, which was extremely weakened, was also a human. It was strange that there were detailed sub-items such as Red Demon Beast and Strider. It wasn't just because of Elagos, but also because their sense of incompatibility was close to exploding beyond the critical point. Well, let me ask. Yong-ho cleared his complicated thoughts by lightly shaking his head. After stopping Lucius' attempt to nag in the bud, Yong-ho took a good break. Red Demon Tyrant. What the heck is that? Chapter 117, Demon King of Distortion 2. As expected, Gusyeon tilted his head. He did the same thing when he heard Red Demon Beast or Strider. Yong-ho narrowed his brows when Gusyeon said he could not understand Elagos' new name at all. At that moment, Aemon cut in. Gusyeon, just stop pretending not to know. My little master. It is probably the name that the soul of the young master or the power of evolution created for the sake of convenience based on his knowledge. That's why Gusyeon doesn't know those names. The power of evolution. Armin responded by increasing the flames. Gusyeon said with a giggle, well, the power of evolution, or the power of the Demon King, is based on the individual soul of the Demon King. Namely, it falls out of nowhere. Maybe I can say it's the power of my little master's soul. Yong-ho already heard a similar story. Recently, Ophelia mentioned the power of the soul while explaining to Yong-ho about the power of the Demon King. When he first exercised the power of evolution, You said you saw things like colored smoke. But now, you can even discern the systemic family tree. Who changed it? Wonderful. Yong-ho nodded. It was a convincing explanation. It was Yong-ho himself who changed the incomprehensible form of colored smoke into an evolutionary information window like the game system. That was the case for them having names after evolution. Yong-ho gave them names for convenience's sake so that he could easily distinguish them. Somehow, I liked it. In fact, the new name reflected Yong-ho's preference because all the words he used to make the names came off the top of his head. Let's stop chatting at this point. The floor master on the 9th floor is waiting for me anxiously. Having said that, Chwiryong sat in his first-class seat. Ammon also silently sat next to him. Silently, Yong-ho turned his shoulders a few times as if to warm up lightly, then headed for the arena. Seated in the front seat of the stand, Catalina watched Yong-ho going to have a rough time. That guy is particularly strong among the floor masters on the 9th floor. This time, our little master might be penalized. Chwiryong giggled, biting a cigar in his mouth. There were several floor masters on each floor of the arena. That was why a different floor master appeared, depending on the challenger. Kentauros Kalai, the 9th floor master, was the strongest among the floor masters available on the 9th floor. Despite Chwiryong's expectation, however, Amon just smiled quietly, then created gentle flames. Chwiryong soon knew why Amon reacted like this. Standing in front of Kentauros Kalai, wearing golden armor and armed with a large sword and shield, Yong-ho activated Iamon and the magnetic field at the same time. Today he intended to fight in a slightly different way than before. The magic power of greed was activated. The green flames that were burning on Yong-ho's right hand and the cold chill on his left hand were embodied in blue, and that wasn't all. This time, Brigada was activated. Yong-ho drew black magic from Catalina, who was sitting in the stand. The green flames and chill were mixed with black magic. Yong-ho found it hard to combine the flames and cold air into one. He could easily add darkness to the attribute of each one. Kentauros Kalai watched Yong-ho in embarrassment. He felt the magical power arising from Yong-ho's hands was unusual. Chwiryong opened his mouth wide, then turned to Ammon after blinking several times. He asked with his eyes, "Have you taught him by any chance?" Ammon answered with flames, suggesting he didn't. Did he realize it by himself then? Oh, our little master really has a knack of surprising people. Yong-ho's next step in using Brigada was to bring out the magic power of his subordinate spirits and make them his own. That wasn't all. Now Yong-ho naturally fused their attributes. By adding darkness to the flames and chill, he created greater power. It was natural that Kentauros Kalai was embarrassed. He had never seen any head of the House of Mammon displaying such abilities based on the spirit's attributes in the arena. I'm sorry for Kalai, but the guy on the 10th floor will have to face the same fate, unfortunately. Oh, it's Kaiwan on the 10th floor. It might be our little master who would be in trouble while challenging Kaiwan. Chwiryong grinned brightly, which looked rather wicked than mischievous. Amon concentrated on the arena again. Yong-ho and Kentauros Kalai clashed head-on. As Chwiryong expected, the arena was filled with Kalai's sad screaming, "How cruel." That was what Chwiryong said first to Yong-ho when he returned to the stands after defeating Kalai. Yong-ho frowned, pointing to his body covered with wounds. "You know I suffered a lot, can't you see?" The combat suit he purchased at the dungeon merchant was a mess. In particular, both sleeves were severely torn. However, Chwiryong clicked his tongue as if he didn't like Yong-ho's way of fighting. Chwiryong said, "That's because you're still inexperienced in using both flames and chill at the same time. Don't you know who was dragging his feet while using all kinds of techniques in the name of practice? I feel sorry for Kalai. He really liked to have the chance of fighting someone strong after a long time, saying he would show his chivalry." Then Chwiryong shook his head from side to side, recalling Kalai's muttering about the honor of a knight even before the fight. Yong-ho scratched his cheek a little. Come to think of it, Yong-ho felt he was too harsh toward Kalai. "Well, I also struggled quite a bit. Seriously, tell Kalai that it was a great match." "Are you kidding?" Chwiryong giggled at that. Anyway, he was glad that Yong-ho made big progress. Yong-ho was getting strong and faster than any other family head that Chwiryong had ever seen until now, and the source of his strength was not only his greed and Amon, which pleased Chwiryong. Wait a minute, Let me serve you after a long time. Suddenly, Gusian reached out to Yong-ho with big hands. Yong-ho unwittingly got nervous, but he didn't step back or act strangely. Something amazing happened when Gusian's hands passed through the air above his head. Wow! Yong-ho's combat uniform, which was in tatters, recovered its original condition. It wasn't clear whether it was possible because of Gusian's personal magic or any special power of the arena, but Yong-ho felt good about it anyway. Can't you upgrade my magic power and physical abilities? Asked Yong-ho. While making a satisfied expression at Yong-ho's question, Gusion frowned because he felt Yong-ho was too greedy, like the king of greed. No, I can't do it for you. As I told you from the beginning, this is my special service for you. Oh, I see. I have to give it up then. Ignoring Gusion's words, Yong-ho searched for something in his pocket. Then he took out a bottle from the set of magic potions he obtained as a reward for defeating Kalai on the 9th floor and drank it. It was different from the magic potion that Citri got him before. To be precise, the goods Citri gave him were superior. Although the magic potion was obtained from the 9th floor, his magic power didn't max out immediately. It helped him heal slowly, but it had nothing like the effect of magic power enhancement. Nonetheless, he got as many as 10 bottles. Moreover, it should be considered that Yong-ho's own magic became so powerful that it could not be compared to when he received the magic potion from Citri. Watching Yong-ho swallowing the magic potion, Gusion whistled and asked with a smile, "Are you trying to challenge the 10th floor without resting first?" Although Gusion told Yong-ho that Kalai was overwhelmed by him, that was not true. Gusion just exaggerated Kalai's defeat to make fun of Yong-ho, so he admitted that Yong-ho also suffered a lot. In a general situation, Yong-ho should stop fighting and go back. He had as many as 10 bottles of magic potion, but at the same time, it meant that he had only 10 now. It didn't befit Yong-ho if he tried to challenge the 10th floor by consuming one of them. But it was Gusion's misjudgment. Yong-ho was by no means the type of person who acted in a calculated way. Well, I feel good. I need to keep up with the momentum, let alone save time. Obviously, Kaiwan was a tough opponent, but Yong-ho's 5 senses were sharpened by his fight with Kalai, so it was the right time for him to challenge Kaiwan. Yong-ho took off the bottle of magic potion from his mouth, which he drank about half of it. Given the speed of his surging magic power, he felt it was wise to stop drinking at this point. I wonder if I can seal this and drink it again later. The magic potion that Citri gave him worked only when he drank it down at a time. Well, I feel I can fight, given that my magic power is surging after drinking half of it. When he was agonizing for a moment, he noticed Catalina flapping her tail gently. He turned to her and asked, "Catalina, would you like to drink it?" In fact, she was exhausted after supplying her black magic to him. She blinked at his unexpected suggestion, but replied with a bright smile, "Thank you." Then she immediately took the magic potion from him and brought it to her mouth. She did it so naturally, but he felt embarrassed. He blushed before he knew it. He hurriedly let out the heat from his face, fanning with his hand desperately. But she was calm, and even Gusion casually looked at him. He felt rather awkward at the moment. "What's the matter with you?" asked Gusion. "Oh, it's kind of hot all of a sudden." Given that Gusion, who liked to make fun of him, tilted his head, Yong-ho realized that he didn't need to be excited at all. Wow, my magic power is really recovering. After drinking the remaining magic potion, Catalina said, smiling brightly again. Yong-ho's eyes were fixed on her lips alone at the moment. "Little Master." It was Ayamon's voice. Chapter 118, Demon King of Distortion 3 The next step that you mentioned last time. Fortunately, Yong-ho came to his senses after hearing Ayamon's voice. Gusion replied with a cheerful smile. "Yeah, I hate to admit it. The next step is for you to empower your subordinate spirits, then share the power of Brigada with them. That's why the kings with the 7 deadly sins should have powerful subordinate spirits under their command. Although there were several subordinate spirits, their master was one. What kind of synergy would be created if the power of all the powerful subordinate spirits were concentrated on their master? What if all the power of 12 spirits of the House of Mammon, each of whom could be called a legend, would be combined into one? That's outrageous. Yong-ho seemed to know why only those who had the 7 deadly sins reigned as kings. It was really a great power. Brigada is a fragment of the Demon King's flesh. the fragments that didn't turn into godly energy. Suddenly, Yong-ho got intensely curious about godly energy. He could exert this much power with a general brigada. Then, what kind of miracle could he pull off if he had godly energy? The 7 unsurpassed magic powers that existed in the demon world were currently owned by each of their masters, namely, the 6 kings of the 7 deadly sins, such as the king of pride, the king of envy, the king of lust, the king of sloth, the king of gluttony, and the king of wrath, and the king of violence, who reigned as king even though he had no 7 deadly sins. If Yong-ho didn't defeat one of them, he would never own the unsurpassed magic power. Yong-ho shook off such thoughts and decided to focus on his current job for now. At that moment, Chwiryong said, "As I told you the other day, your opponent on the 10th floor is Chwiryong. Since the reward is special, the penalty is also special. What is the reward? Well, you can check with your own eyes after winning. I can't tell you the penalty right now, but at least you're not dying because of the penalty, so don't worry." "Can you tell me which floor Chwiryong lost?" asked Yong-ho one after another. As if he organized his thoughts, Chwiryong replied after moving his neck several times. "Well, she was defeated several times. It would be no exaggeration to say that as a family head, she experienced the most defeats since the arena was created. If there is one of her defeats that you might be interested in, it's the 20th floor. It was the penalty that demoted Chwiryong to a subordinate spirit of the arena from the head of the House of Mammon. It was the 20th floor, not far from where Yong-ho was." "You don't have to delay. Let's get started," Yong-ho said, turning his arm lightly. Not only Yong-ho's magic power, but also Catalina's was almost completely restored. Giggling to himself, Chwiryong pointed to the arena with his chin. "Chwiryong is waiting for you at the moment," and very earnestly at that Yong-ho turned to the arena. Indeed, as Chwiryong said, a woman with gray hair was standing there alone. Chwiryong, the demon king of distortion. It was her. Chwiryong wasn't dressed in an attire that Yong-ho used to see in the arena, a skin-tight leather attire mixed with black and red and a long hanging sword. Her gray hair was wrapped around her sad but ferocious face. She was the same as the one that he peeked at through the little magical power present in her ring of distortion. That look of hers was the same as the one when she was still the head of the House of Mammon. On the surface, she was quite calm. Rather, she was full of spite at the moment. Chwiryong stared at Yong-ho without saying anything, and Yong-ho faced her silently. After taking a deep breath, he opened the bag he brought for this visit in particular. He took out an old book and handed it to Chwiryong. "This is Chwiryong's journal. He kept a journal until he died." Chwiryong's eyes trembled. Yong-ho finally realized that Chwiryong wasn't staring at him, but just looking at him. Yong-ho waited this time again, and Chwiryong clenched her teeth. After she received the journal reluctantly, she slowly turned the pages. Nobody hastened their fight. Chwiryong was silent, and the arena spirits and the previous heads of the House of Mammon in the stands waited for Chwiryong to respond. Chwiryong couldn't read the journal properly because her overflowing tears wet the journal. She gasped for breath. Soon, she struggled to hold back her tears, but she couldn't control herself after all. She cried sadly like a child. Yong-ho waited again this time. After hesitating for a moment, he carefully hugged her. Just like she first heard about Chwiryong's death, she didn't push away Yong-ho. Relying on his body temperature, she expressed her sorrow freely. How much time passed? Chwiryong's crying subsided, but she did not lift his forehead from his chest. After catching her breath several times, she said in a low voice, "Thanks." Then she pushed him out. She also stepped back to increase the distance between them. Finally, she faced him. At that moment, he just replied, "You're welcome." When he deliberately spoke lightly, Chwiryong smiled a bit. Laughing a little loudly, she said, "You didn't attack me when I was reading the journal or crying. Then, you could have defeated me easily." That was what Yong-ho didn't expect at all. He heard Chwiryong, who was sitting in the special seat in the stands, laughing heartily. Yong-ho smiled bitterly and said, "Well, I could do so, but it's not fair." It was a lie. Yong-ho didn't even think about it in the first place. Chwiryong knew it too. That was why she hugged Chwiryong's journal dearly, then turned around. Only after leaving it outside the arena, she stood again, looking at Yong-ho. "If we fight for nothing, it won't be fun. So, Let's bet. If you beat me, I'll grant your wish, no matter what it is, she said. What if I lose? When he asked back immediately, she leaned her head slightly. Well, I haven't really thought about it. In fact, I'm so grateful to you that I don't want to ask you for anything. Although it was brief, she smiled at him. Perhaps she had never smiled like that for the past few decades. Yong-ho was calm on the surface, but very agitated deep down. Did she say she would grant my wish no matter what? At that moment, he heard somebody shouting from behind him, me too. It was Catalina. Raising her tail upright, she shouted with her blushing face, If your master beats me, I'll grant your wish. Why did Catalina suddenly interfere? Catalina flinched at Yong-ho's embarrassed glance. She then covered her mouth with both hands. With her ears drooping, she became silent. Yong-ho blinked again, and Kaiwan smiled brightly. She even giggled, holding her belly. She was very different from the one that Yong-ho used to remember. Even Gusion and the former Mammon family heads, who looked at her with an embarrassed expression, felt the same way. She is cute, Kaiwan took her breath. Then she faced Yong-ho with a bright smile that she had never shown to anyone other than her younger brother Kaien. Let me tell you again, thanks so. Her ecstatic smile was brief. There was now ferociousness in her eyes, full of affection. Powerful magic power came out from her body that was defenseless a moment ago. Kaiwan stepped forward. Her step was very light, but it was far from small Kaiwan's. Breathing quickly enveloped Yong-ho. I will do my best. As soon as she finished talking, she brought out a storm with her sword. Yong-ho couldn't remember how he stopped her first blow. Her enchanted smile made him let down his guard, and her single advance made a dozen meters of distance to zero. It was a miracle that he stopped her first sword attack, aiming at his chest. No, it wasn't like a miracle. Yong-ho stopped it with his skills. His sense of fighting never collapsed because of her smile. His sense of death, which he cultivated by dying dozens or hundreds of times, responded sharply. The moment Kaiwan swung her sword, the magnetic field covered Yong-ho's left arm. Her sword and the magnetic field collided, and Yong-ho's lower body hit the ground hard without waiting for his command. Without resisting the force from her attack, he moved his body accordingly. He increased the distance to buy time. While he was stepping back, the flames of Red Lotus arose. Kaiwan's vision was dazzled for a moment, and by the time the flames disappeared, he already grabbed Armin. His distance from Kaiwan was only 5 meters. Both hit the ground at the same time. They rushed toward each other. Yong-ho flew high. He wielded Aemon hard from top to bottom. On the other hand, Kaiwan flew low. She looked like she was crawling on the floor. She pulled her hand holding the sword between her armpits. Yong-ho concentrated so he could share the time. At that moment, Amon drew a beautiful trajectory. She was inside the trajectory. Now, even before she touched him, she was about to expose her upper body to Ammon. But that didn't happen. Boom. During that moment, Ammon struck the air, not Kaiwan. Clearly, Yong-ho struck down with Aemon, but it was a horizontal cut. Aemon's flames burned the air above Kaiwan's gray hair. Space distortion. She didn't just make a shield to protect herself. She distorted the space itself where Yong-ho was attacking and directed Aemon's attack into the wrong place, but she herself penetrated into his body. Besides, she moved around behind his back and babbled on cheerfully. It's time for you to be punished. Her sword wrapped around his body. It wasn't a figurative expression, but it was real. It was what they called a whip sword. Its blade, which turned into something like a whip, coiled his body like a snake, and Kaiwan shook her arm roughly. Then she hurled him hard on the ground. A powerful shock beyond imagination hit him on the back. Moreover, the blade of the whip sword slit his body. A dazzling sense of pain penetrated his spine, as if it contained poison. Or there was something special about Kaiwan's magic power, flowing through the blade. Her attack didn't end there. She unleashed her Herculean power and randomly swung the whip sword that stretched more than a dozen meters. Yong-ho, hanging on the end of the whip sword, had to kiss the ground several times. It lasted dozens of seconds at most, but his damages were beyond imagination. He had never been dealt a big blow like this since he challenged his opponents in the arena. Actually, he had never been wounded heavily since he fought Foras Guok. Yong-ho became more vigilant. His whole body ached, but he activated the green flames. burning Kaiwan's mana. He opened all 4 horns. At that moment, Kaiwan's wick sword could not withstand his vast mana and let go of him, but he couldn't feel relieved because she, who was standing before him, was gone. He cast the spell of chill as much as he could. He instinctively activated it. Kaiwan, who was about to attack him from the side, was engulfed by the chill. But he failed this time too. The shield of distortion that she spread out wide drove out the chill. Then she charged at him and brandished the sword Kuak. The tight and powerful sword struck his waist like a blunt weapon. At that moment, he almost broke his legs, but he endured it, clenching his teeth. Once again, he swung Amon and spouted the waves of green flames. But she escaped his attack. She disappeared again this time. The green flames went nowhere. Blocked by the barrier of distortion. Chapter 119. Demon King of Distortion. 4 Hess. Being fooled by her. Watching their fight silently for some time, Gusyeon spoke. The battle went on as he expected. Objectively, Kaiwan had more disadvantages than Young-ho. Although she had 4 horns as he did, the quality and quantity of her mana were different. Young-ho had almost 5 horns, while Kaiwan just managed to get 4. The same was true for their physical strength and durability. In all respects, Young-ho's body went through a total change, so it was superior to hers in every respect. Young-ho also surpassed her in the ability to detect mana. Beyond detecting it, he even discerned it. Moreover, he freely used more than 2 attributes, while she could use only 1 attribute. Above all, she could not discern mana as he did. Namely, he was superior to her in terms of mana, comprehensive physical performance, and sense. The only advantage she had over him was her talent for fighting. But she was stronger. Fighting was not about comparing the same things. Fighting was about defeating the opponent with one's comparative advantage. Kaiwan was slightly faster than Young-ho. For more than a few decades, he honed her skills in the arena. She had far superior swordsmanship than him. These 3 factors were more than enough for her win. She would teach him what defeat was, but he is expecting to defeat her. Amon spoke quietly. Gusyeon turned to Amon and smiled bitterly. He wanted Young-ho to learn from defeat. He wanted Young-ho to reflect on his own shortcomings on the occasion of this fighting. But on one hand, Gusyeon expected Young-ho to overcome this ordeal. He wanted Young-ho to break through the 10th floor without any defeat for the first time in the opening of the arena by defeating her. Can he defeat her? Asked Gusyeon. Instead of replying right away, Amon sparked red flames. He looked at the arena. The fighting was going on. Maybe he will. He should surely. Gusyeon also looked at the arena. He opened his eyes wide at the spectacular scene there and stood up in no time. That's why I like my little master. Fortunately, Young-ho couldn't hear it. That was why Gusyeon laughed louder. He swung his clenched fist in the air. Amon smiled quietly, then he watched Young-ho. The moment Gusyeon turned his head, Kaiwan, who hit Young-ho multiple times, was about to step back to increase the distance between them. Kaiwan hit the ground in succession. She wanted to distract his gaze with her exceedingly speedy jump. Her own attack was effective. She could block his long-range attack with the power of distortion. In terms of short-range fighting, she was much more advantageous. If she continued to fight on like this, she could defeat him overwhelmingly. What she told him first was sincere. She really appreciated his consideration. Since she was so grateful to him, she wanted to show her skills fully. Gusyeon told her to teach him about defeat, saying it would make him stronger and that it would help him truly stand tall as the king of greed. Kaiwan agreed. That was why she activated her mana more ferociously. Strong mana radiated from her 4 horns. This time, she planned to attack him from behind. This time, she wanted to deal a fatal blow by breaking his legs. But she did not want to inflict severe pain on him. She wanted to finish the fighting as soon as possible. However, Young-ho had no intention of giving up so easily. The waves of the green flames swept over Kaiwan once again, who was about to attack him from behind. Moreover, this time, it was different from the previous one. She thought the green flames would engulf her from the front, but bigger waves of flames swept her from overhead. It was like a tsunami, a huge attack that she could not avoid nor distort. Kaiwan clenched her teeth. She wrapped the power of distortion around her whole body. With the shield of space, she blocked his attack from all directions except the floor. The green flames covered the barrier of distortion. They continued to burn without fading, as if to block Kaiwan's movement. His mana kept pouring down from above. It was definitely a huge power. Kaiwan could do nothing except sticking it out with the barrier of distortion. But his attack was relentless. No matter how strong his mana was, it was too excessive. If this fighting would end up as a war of attrition, it would be Yong-ho, not Kaiwai, who would be defeated. How long could he keep that waterfall of flames? A dozen or 2 seconds at most. Kaiwan curled up her body so as to reduce her mana by reducing the barrier of distortion. Fighting was about striking the opponent with one's strength. However, Yong-ho made the wrong move. This is better for him. Kaiwan didn't need to torment him anymore. All she had to do was to wait until he collapsed after using up his mana. But her assumption crumbled in just a few seconds. What the heck is this? She raised her head, then hugged her shoulders before she knew it. Everybody was tense. The blood of Mammon, the king of greed, flowing through her body, shouted wildly. The waves of the green flames were still robust. Kaiwan could not dare to release the power of distortion. She could not even see something green beyond her eyes. A few seconds passed again, and Kaiwan gulped. She could clearly feel that Yong-ho's mana was getting stronger. Even though he was pouring out his mana like crazy, his strength grew stronger and stronger. What the hell is happening outside? An unknown fear seized Kaiwan. She couldn't stand it anymore. This time, it was Kaiwan's turn to go the extra mile. Kaiwan didn't save her mana. Faced with the overwhelming waves of the green flames, she solidified the barrier of distortion. Then, she launched herself to cut through the waves of the green flames. During that short span of time, Kaiwan ran into the gap in the waterfall of the green flames that seemed to close anytime soon. She managed to get out of it, and looked at him. And she understood what he had done and why he bound her with the waterfall of green flames. Green eyes flashed from his eyes. Unlike his right hand, which he extended as if to control the waterfall of green flames, he placed his left hand on his chest. What he activated was the power of evolution. And what he had done for several seconds when she was held in the waterfall of green flames was the evolution of mana specialization. It was crazy. He had never used the power of evolution in the midst of fully pouring out mana. He should not have done it in front of his enemy. Nonetheless, he did. He had a duel with Tigreus. He had fighting experiences while conquering the 5th to 9th floor, and now he was fighting Kaiwan. During the battle, his evolution EXP reached the maximum. It wasn't the first time. Normally he would have put it off after the battle. He knew how to fight. He hit the opponent's strength with his own strength. By using that skill, he could survive until now. He continued to defeat his opponents, who were much stronger than him objectively. It was his mana that made him superior to Kaiwan. However, he could not defeat her with his current mana. What should he do now? The answer was simple. He needed to make his strength more mighty and surpass her in terms of mana. Powerful mana swirled around him. The waterfall of the green flames disappeared, but no one could notice it because he was now showing a more powerful strength. A 5th horn sprouted through his forehead. The moment he overcame the wall of distortion, he released mana completely different from the previous one. Moreover, he didn't stop there. Another roar rang from the barrier surrounding the arena. Catalina screamed in pain and joy, clutching her chest. A 4th horn sprouted over Catalina's ears. The moment Yong-ho became stronger, Catalina, the dungeon spirit, also overcame the barrier, which once again reinforced him. Kaiwan couldn't hesitate anymore. Rather than overwhelmed, she rushed forward courageously as if she could not be defeated. But he couldn't reach her. Although he desperately wielded his sword, he was blocked by the shield of distortion. The green flames, reinforced by Catalina's black mana, encircled Kaiwan in an instant. Yong-ho gasped for breath. Doing evolution during battle was indeed difficult, but he smiled. Beyond the shield of distortion that started from her left hand, he faced her eyes that became as sharp as those of cats and beasts. It's round 2. Now it begins. Kaiwan couldn't answer. Yong-ho didn't care. He concentrated the power of greed in one place and expanded the shield of distortion into a terrifying size. Kaiwan's slender body bounced out in an instant. Instead of pursuing her, Yong-ho extended his right hand. Catalina, In response to his call, her black mana expanded with an explosive momentum. Looking almost like a giant's hand, it grabbed Kaiwan. Kaiwan hastily activated the power of distortion, but it was too late. By the time she activated the power of distortion, the giant's hand was already hitting the floor Kuhuk. She had a shock that seemed to break her whole body. However, Yong-ho did not stop there. He did not miss the manner of the wind arising from her left arm. He had the black giant press down on her with his hand and activated the green flames once again. The green flames were blazing, aided by black mana. The flames reached her in an instant, like a spark burning along a fuse, and swallowed up the mana of the wind that she created hard. After swallowing her, who protected himself with the shield of distortion, he beat her body with black mana. It was literally a brutal attack. Even though he was using Catalina's mana through Brigada, he still felt it was insufficient. Obviously, it was a war of attrition. Yong-ho violently roared and swung his right arm once again. Then he struck down Kaiwan several times, who was engulfed with the green flames by the giant's hands. However, Kaiwan suffered no wounds thanks to the shield of distortion. But she could do nothing about the shock. When she was struck for the third time, and when Yong-ho also felt that he reached his limits, the shield of distortion surrounding her body was broken. It was not because she couldn't withstand the shock, but because she lost all her energy. Yong-ho hurriedly withdrew his mana. At that moment, he felt tremendous fatigue. Since he used too much mana, his hands and feet were trembling. Although he couldn't see her, he felt Catalina gasping for breath in the stands. However, he moved forward instead of sitting down. Then he approached Kaiwan, who fell on the floor and wiggled. Kaiwan was on the verge of losing consciousness. Barely holding on, she looked at Yong-ho's face and smiled a bit. She almost ran out of steam when she swore, "You bad bastard." Yong-ho smiled. She passed out with a smile. Mammon's mana was formed over her body. He grasped Mammon's mana with more joy than before. He enjoyed the full thrill of victory. Right after that, he saw boxes of light floating before his eyes. Chapter 12. The Garden of Life. 1. Yong-ho did not wait for the guidance of greed. The moment he saw the boxes of light lining up side by side, he could feel it immediately. On the far left was something that could grant his wish. It was so natural, and Yong-ho realized that he was breathing with greed. He wasn't sure if it was a temporary phenomenon or if he really leveled up, but at least for now, it could be said that Yong-ho was greed itself. When he touched them, the boxes of light shattered, scattering away. A sheet of antique parchment appeared through the twinkling light, magic scroll. The moment Yong-ho blinked and grabbed the parchment, somebody shouted loudly, "Hey, little master, you're so cruel and brutal, you have no mercy at all." Yong-ho quickly turned his head to find Chwiryong standing there. Catalina was in his arms, who contracted the distance between the stands and the arena with one big jump. As he had such a big build, she looked like a baby in his arms. "Since she could not come here in person, I've carried her here." With a hearty laugh, Chwiryong put her down on the floor. She stumbled as if she heard some loud noise above her head, or she was exhausted, so he quickly reached out to support her. Then he hugged her waist with one hand. "Catalina, are you okay?" When he gently hugged her in her arms and asked carefully, she nodded. She smiled with an effort. "I'm fine." She was lying, of course. Her whole body was hot like a fireball, as if she had a fever after a fourth horn sprouted shortly ago. However, it seemed that he didn't have to worry much. She experienced it before, and above all, there was a great sense of accomplishment and joy in her eyes. In the end, Yong-ho also smiled at her and said, "Thanks, I've won, thanks to you." Having said that, he stroked her head with his other hand that did not hold her waist. She slightly bit her lower lip, as if to hide her expression, but she couldn't help but turn her mouth up slightly with joy. She couldn't even control her flapping ears and tail. "Hey, you guys are looking good, but they are watching you," said Chwiryong, pointing toward the stands with his chin. Not only the former heads of the House of Mammon, but also the arena spirits were watching Yong-ho and Catalina intensely. Yong-ho tried to avoid embarrassment by clearing his throat. He then gently lowered her from his arms. After persuading her, who was trying to stand up, to sit down on the floor, he faced Chwiryong. Then he held out the scroll that came out of the light boxes. "What is this summons?" There was a word placed at the top, which looked like the title. Gusyon answered, folding his arms. As the name suggests, it is a summons. You can summon the arena's spirits. At that moment, Yongho's eyes looked different. Gusyon laughed insidiously because he already expected such a reaction. However, there are some limitations. While reading the summons instinctively, Yongho raised his head again, giggling a lot. Gusyon raised 3 of his fingers. First, this is not permanent. If you read the summons carefully, you will realize that the maximum days of summons are 3 days. Then he folded 1 finger. The 3 fingers did not mean only the summoning period of 3 days. Second, summon targets are limited to the floor masters you have defeated so far. In other words, Im excluded from the summons list. Dang it, moaned Yongho before he knew it. He regretted a lot that he could not summon Gusyon. If he could, Gusyon could do lots of things during those 3 days. His regret was Gusion's pleasure. Gusyon said with an air of arrogance, "Oh, it is too early for you to be disappointed. The floor masters you summon can sincerely do their best without any adjustment. That's the 3rd limitation." Gusyon folded all 3 fingers. At that moment, something came to Yongho's mind quickly. "Gusyon, you said Kaiwan went up to the 20th floor, right?" "Yes." "You said that the 10th floor is special. Is the 11th floor weaker than the 10th floor?" "No way." Replying leisurely, Gusyon observed Yongho. At first, he didn't like Yongho that much, but these days, the more he saw Yongho, the more he liked this little master. Obviously, Yongho must have grasped the meaning of the 3rd limitation while talking with Gusyon. Kaiwan had climbed to the 20th floor. That meant that Kaiwan was at least stronger than the floor master on the 19th floor. Despite that, Kaiwan was serving as the floor master on the 10th floor instead of the 19th floor. If that was the case, the reason for that was just one. Yongho realized what it meant when Kaiwan said she would use her total might right before fighting. So what she meant was she would use her total might on the 10th floor. Right. Correct. Kaiwan did not lie. Like she said, she really did her best. However, her total might was limited. Yongho made a forced laugh. He asked, dropping his shoulders, "I wonder if all the floor masters did the same thing." Some of them did, but others didn't. For example, the steel cow Taurine you fought on the 1st floor has used his total might, but poor Kalai, who lost to you on the 9th floor, is different. The real Kalai is much stronger. After all, the lower their assigned floor was, the less might they could use. Come to think of it, such logic was very plausible. Yongho didn't know how many spirits there were in the arena, but it was difficult to think that their individual abilities were ranked according to the difficulty level of each floor. What are the specific restrictions? Well, mana or physical abilities as a whole. There are some other things, but it's difficult to list them all because each individual has different capabilities, as if it was difficult to explain. Gusyon, with a slight frown, shook his hand. Gusyon then glanced at the summons in Yongho's hand, as if to change the topic, and said, "Even if you have passed the 10th floor, few guys get the reward. Like you. Obviously, you will find it useful." Yongho nodded unwittingly. Now that the battle with the Western region was around the corner, there was no reward more valuable than this one. Indeed, it's a special reward. You deserve to be condescending. No way. As you know, there are some more rewards. Oh my gosh. I've never seen Kaiwan smiling so brightly like that. Pointing to Kaiwan with his chin, who passed out, Gusyon giggled again. At that moment, Yongho tilted his head because he couldn't understand what Gusyon said. In no time, he blushed. Wish, obviously, she mentioned it. Since she mentioned it without specifying the situation where Yongho would be defeated, it was difficult to say that the betting was proper, but she made the promise anyway. "If you win, I will grant your wish, no matter what it is." Kaiwan's voice was automatically played in his head. Moreover, it wasn't just her voice that came to his mind. Yongho's eyes turned to the lower right. Catalina, who was resting quietly, flinched at his gaze and lowered her head slightly. Unlike her stiff tail, her slightly drooping ears were red. "Any wish?" Kaiwan clearly said she would grant it. Yongho blushed. He was a 20-year-old blood-boiling youth who graduated from all-male middle and high schools as well as college. Even if a saint peeked into his mind, he wouldn't blame this young man. However, there was someone who admired him in a different way. A tremendous desire. No, it's anguish. It's It's really awesome. It's awesome in many ways, little master. If you had this kind of anguish in the battle with Kaiwan, I guess you would have won even without turning to evolution. Armin's stern voice broke his delusions. Only then did Yong-ho notice Gusion's smirking gaze and cleared his throat in succession. Then he blew away the heat from his face by fanning it with his hand. Right at that moment, his legs were wobbly and he flopped down helplessly. Oh my gosh, my lord. Catalina, with her head down, was startled and hurriedly turned to Yong-ho. As if to stop her, Gusion shook his hand. You don't have to worry. He is simply exhausted. As you witnessed, he was messed up by Kaiwan. His injuries were almost healed in the process of evolution, but his accumulated damages were still there. Gusion said to Yong-ho, Go to Skathak. She will cure you well. Injuries in the arena weren't real injuries. However, his mind regarded his injuries in the arena as real, so he could not overlook his injuries. What he could avoid in the arena was physical damage and death. So, he had to endure the fatigue, pain, and after effects from his injuries. Well, you have a point. But Yong-ho also knew Skathak's ability because the reason he sought her from the beginning was to have her treat his injuries in the arena. Like Gusion said, he actually went to Skathak for treatment in the past, but there was something that he had to do first, for now. Like you said, I don't think the compensation is over yet. Ha! This time, Gusion tilted his head. Yong-ho looked at Amon on his wrist. Amon, unlike Gusion, Amon understood what Yong-ho meant. It wasn't just Yong-ho whose evolution EXP maxed out. It had been a few months since Yong-ho obtained Amon. There have been so many things since then. Above all, he experienced so many deadly fights that he couldn't count them one by one. And finally, all of Aemon's evolution EXP were gathered. Aemon's previous changes were made due to the power of evolution. It was because Amon himself released his power a little more with Yong-ho getting strong enough. He wanted to evolve Amon. He wanted to make Amon return to his original figure, which Yong-ho had degenerated to fit himself. However, Amon gently expressed his rejection. He spoke in a strict but friendly voice. You don't need to hurry, little master. First, I recommend you to visit Skathak for rest. You are exhausted. And as things stand now, you can't evolve my body. And, as a little master, you had better hear something from Skathak. Yong-ho could not accept it initially, how earnestly he wished for the chance to evolve Aemon since he got him. Above all, he had been long prepared for evolving Amon, the Spear of Red Lotus. After all, Yong-ho nodded, accepting his suggestion. Yong-ho stopped thinking about him any further. He turned to Kaiwan. Although she passed out after exhausting her physical strength, she looked very calm. Can I see her when I come here next time? Actually, he met none of the floor masters that he had defeated so far. Gusion replied sardonically. Don't worry, just think about your wish. Well, it must be too obvious. Then he laughed slyly again. Yong-ho, who blushed instinctively, said a little fiercely, Bullshdan, man, give me the letter. What letter?